When I was a child, I had a teacher who was fond of telling a story about a man who was very forgetful. When he woke up in the morning, the story went, he could never remember where he had put the things the night before, and so one night, he worked out a plan. He took out a pencil and a pad, and as he got undressed, he wrote exactly where all the clothes had been put. The next morning when he woke up, he took the piece of paper and began to read the list. My cap, he wrote, is on the dresser. He went over to the dresser, and sure, there it was. And then he put it on and then made a check mark on the pad of paper. Then he looked at the paper again, and it said, my pants are on the chair. So he went to the chair, and there they were. And then he looked at the paper again and said, my shirt is on the table. And he went to the table, and there it was. And so it went until he was fully dressed, at which point he said to himself, this is fine, but where am I? And he looked, the story went, and he could not find himself. I used to think that was a funny story. As I matured, I believed that this was a story that spoke to many things. But today I want to use it to talk about one thing. After all, this is a day of remembering. I think the story has stayed with me because so much of what I do is about the power of memory. In other words, without memory, we are nowhere. I have seen, as all of you have, what memory can do for and to people. I know about memory's strength and about its weaknesses. I know about memory's successes and also about its failures. But as we age, the power of memory within us grows. Maybe it is because there is more to remember, and maybe it is because life's depth is found in what we hold on to. The prominent Jewish historian Yosef Yerushalmi, in his great book, which is called Zachor, Remember, tells the story of two soldiers who had survived the Second World War. Both suffered from brain injuries that affected their memory. One of them, Yerushalmi writes, couldn't remember anything more than just past 20 or 30 minutes. He no longer had any long-term memory. The other soldier only remembered things that had happened before his injury. He had no memory of anything that had happened even 30 seconds in the past. He had no short-term memory, which is to say, Yerushalmi goes on to write, that one had no past and the other had no present. And therefore, he said, neither had a future. Is there an idea more Jewish than this one? Is there an idea that is more fitting or suited to this morning? After all, the name that we give to this morning is Yizkor, which is what I want to talk to you about, because I, like you, have a memory about today. It is commonly recorded that it took place on October the 7th, 2023. But saying those words don't feel right to me, as now the surviving hostages have mercifully returned to their homes and families, as the remains and hopefully the complete return of those remains of those who have perished are now gratefully begun to be brought back to their proper resting. It is right for us to remember the thousands who with violence and cruelty poured over Israel's border with Gaza on that morning because they went with the intention to rape, murder, burn, and capture Jews. And because of that, we should memorialize this moment as Jews do. It's interesting to note that the origin of the calendar that we use throughout the Western world and most of the developed world begins with Julius Caesar. It's called the Julian calendar, which took place about 2,000 years ago. Running an empire, Caesar found, requires communication and coordination, with both requires dates and times. Julian Caesar's calendar achieved that, but it had some serious problems with it, like requiring a leap year every 4 years to make up for problems with syncing with the solar cycle. 1,500 years later, this calendar is then replaced by what we now call the Gregorian calendar, named after Pope Gregory, and a look to fix the problems found with Caesar's calendar, which it did. But in order to fix those problems, it had to give away or remove 10 days of Julius Caesar's calendar. And with the stroke of a pen, 10 days were wiped away as if they never existed, to be erased from memory forever, which is something the Jewish people would never allow to happen. This Jewish holiday began last night at 6:19, not 6:20 and not 6:18, but 6:19. It will end tomorrow at 7:24, not 7:25, 7:24. The fast in Yom Kippur ended this year at 7:37. Next year will end at 8:21. Rarely a week goes by that I am not asked, what day does someone's yard site begin on? When someone has to end saying their Kaddish? When a Shiva begins or when a Shiva ends? The Jews have marked time not to manage an empire, but to capture our souls. And to do that, we dare not lose anything, not even a minute, because love lives in time. The French writer Proust, Jewish writer by the way, his great work was originally titled Remembrance of Things Past by its first translator from French into English, a man named Terence Kilmartin. That wasn't the title that Proust had chosen in French, not even close, but Kilmartin had a love for Shakespeare and had taken it from there. The real translation of Proust's work is called Search for Lost Time. And the Jewish idea is built on the very same thing. We are never ending in our search for lost time. It dominates the fabric of Jewish life, that as we move forward, the events of yesterday are always tethered and connected to us. Soldiers in Israel are brought to Masada, visiting dignitaries to Yad Vashem. School children in Israel hike the country with the Tanakh, with the Hebrew Bible in their hand. For us, there's the Seder at Pesach, the Sukkah on Sukkot, the glass breaking at a wedding, all hurl us backwards, even as we lurch forwards. What Judaism did was take memory out of the hands of the individual, and it made them share it with all of us. The strength of collective memory would overcome the finite moral grasp of mine or yours lives. So I don't want to remember what took place on October the 7th, 2023, on the calendar date of October the 7th. For one reason, because in the secular world, to be called history is said to be done and over with. In the Jewish world, history is just the beginning. October the 7th, 2023 was today. On Shemini Atzaret, it was Yizkor. And Yizkor is not about memory, but about the loving act of remembering. And let us now acknowledge that not all memory is eternal. There are things that are forgotten, that names and dates and times do disappear. To say that we remember is to also know that something might not be remembered. In other words, you may remember, but to be remembered is something entirely different. And that difference is where Jewish memory is built. And you can see it in that when you lose someone you love, that as things progress in your life, you wonder, what would they be now if they were here? How would they react to me being this or that, to me being here or there? When things change in our lives, we wonder, what would it be like if they were here to see this? This is remembering. But alas, the Jewish writer, Leon Wieseltier, said it's so much better. He wrote that the difference between the living and the dead is the difference between the remembered and the forgotten. To be alive but forgotten or neglected or denied, is that not a kind of death? And to be dead but remembered or studied or missed, is that not a kind of living too? On Shemini Atzaret 2 years ago, at 6:35 in the kibbutz of Nachal Oz, Yahav, Shaili, and Sheila Itri were in their safe room. They lived in the old section of the kibbutz, and many of the safe rooms in that area, because it was old, had been retrofitted. And as a result, some of the doors didn't lock, or the steel windows couldn't be secured down properly. On that morning, they sat in the dark, and they heard explosions, and then gunfire, and then voices just outside their home. They stopped speaking, and their dog became strangely silent. Shaili turned to her husband Yahav and whispered to him, "You hold the door, and I'll hold the baby." But then the safe room filled with the light of day, because one of the terrorists threw open the metal window that couldn't be secured, and he began to squeeze himself into the room. Yahav turned to her and screamed to take the baby and to run, and this was the last time that she would see him. Shoeless, phoneless, she ran with the baby in hand into the morning light. Terrorists to the right, so she turned left. She ran to the houses of her neighbors, knocking, begging to be let in, and no one answered. Later, she would learn that they had all been murdered. From there, she ran into the open fields. She hid in the bush. And then as the terrorists drew close to the bushes, she ran to a tool shed. And there in the shed, she prayed the baby wouldn't cry. She heard the sounds of searching terrorists as they were going closer. And she said, "It felt like I was in a movie about the Holocaust." She knew she had to make a run for it again. And out she went with the baby, crossing another open field, and knocked on more doors until one opened, and they pulled her in. For the next 27 hours, they all remained in a dark, sealed, safe room in complete silence until the army finally arrived to save them. And as she stepped out of the door into the next morning, October the 8th, she heard the sounds of birds chirping, and she began to wail. She knew that her family was lost to her, that Yahav, her husband, was lost to her, that her home was lost to her. And in the weeks and months that passed, she would go to wonder why she didn't tell him to run out with them. But she knows the answer, because he would have done it all over again. He always gave love to everything that he loved. He loved being a father and a husband, and she knew that they survived because he held back the terrorists who were breaking into their home. This all was on an interview that I had heard a few days ago. The interviewer then asks what she thinks about now. And Shaili, the mother, says that nothing has changed in her life. He holds the door, and she said, "I hold the baby." And as the tears streamed down her face, suddenly their dog appears in the frame and begins to lick the tears from her face. And so let us remember. Let us remember those who were murdered on this day, Shemini Atzaret, Yizkor, 2 years ago. Let us study the long tale of our people, those who were taken because they were one of us. And now let us miss those we knew and loved with every fiber of our being, our mothers and our fathers, our spouses and our siblings, our tender sons and beloved daughters. We miss them every moment of every day. But on this day, we are told their memories are not just held alone in our hearts. Today, they are held in all of our hearts. Chag Sameach.